Welcome, everyone. It is Wednesday, July 15th. Welcome to DirectLine Live. We've got our favorite guest, author, China expert, Middle East expert of all things foreign policy, Ethan Gutmann. Welcome to our show. And our hosts tonight are myself, Mark Unkefer, and Blake, University of Maryland College of Home's Vice President. Welcome to the show, Blake. Take it away.
Well, welcome, Ethan. The last time we had you on your book, I think you were dodging, maybe I'm reading too much into it. You were dodging your publisher because this is a book you've been working on for a long time, and we've been waiting for it, and it is finally out. And I have to tell you, it's really worth the wait, and it's obviously a follow-on to the wonderful work, the really searing work that you've done in the past about the Uyghur genocide, but you've managed to top it with more additional information. Why don't you just briefly summarize what your conclusions were from in the book?
Well, I hate to start out with numbers, but because numbers alienate people. But you know what? Without numbers, you've got nothing. Okay. So basically, the premise of this book was to see if the organ harvesting, the forced organ harvesting in China, has been clearly established. I mean, people can say, well, it's not established in my mind. Yeah, that's because you haven't read it. You haven't read the info, okay? For anyone who's actually sat down and gone through the mountains of material, and I'm not just talking about mine, I'm talking about several great people that have really put a lot of work into this. There's no question that the Falun Gong, the religious group in China, was the main victim, at least during the starting at the very end of the 90s, going all the way to about 2013, 2014, where it starts to drop off with them. Okay. And the question was, well, all these Uyghurs, that is the Muslims of Northwest China, who are ethnically kind of Caucasian, not really Asians at all in some respects, or at least not East Asian, certainly not Han Chinese. And they had always been in a lot of conflict with the Chinese state. And there's been a lot of talk of separatism within the quiet talk of separatism within the Uyghur community. The Chinese suddenly turned to them and in an unprecedented move, took every man, woman, and child above the age of 12 and had them all medically tested. That was in 2000, starting in 2014, going into 2015. This is about 10, maybe 11, 12 million people who got tested. The tests were not ordinary. The tests were DNA tests and blood tests, and to some extent, organ tests. Now, obviously, they're not going to turn all these people into, organ donors who die on the operating table and so forth. Their organs get stripped out one by one. But it was very unusual to see this. It was who found that out? Human Rights Watch. Now, I'm very critical of Human Rights Watch. I mean, they might as well just call themselves a Palestinian organization sometimes, I think. But they really, really had got a scoop on this one. And I was very impressed by it. The problem was their conclusion was this was all about surveillance. That this whole thing was like a vast invasion of privacy, that the Chinese wanted DNA and they wanted blood, the blood test. They didn't mention the blood test. Well, surveillance is true. That's absolutely a fact of life in China. But invasion of privacy is not usually what comes to mind when you're talking about people being harvested for their organs and killed, especially at a young age. And anyways, the point is that was my theory, was this is the continuation of what we've seen earlier. About 25, we didn't know the numbers, but with Falun Gong really, but we knew it was in the thousands and the tens of thousands every year. We knew that about China was successfully performing approximately 80,000 successful transplants per year. That's a lot. And the only problem was that there was no way to get to the numbers because the Chinese had learned from my investigation and other people's investigation. Don't let your people go. Don't let them out of the country. If they've been in a camp, if they've been under heavy surveillance, if they've been tortured, do not let them out. That was the first thing they realized. The second thing was stop giving glamorous names to your torture chambers. Okay, so don't call it Dragon Mountain Re-Education Center, or don't call it Shenyang Prison City. Just don't even give them names at all, these camps. And that's what we saw. Was after this, we were seeing these camps being built. By 2015, 2016, they're just like mushrooms after a spring rain. They're appearing everywhere, all over Google Maps. You could just see them blossoming. Biggest camps the world's ever seen. Okay, so when I look at this, I kind of go, well, I don't know, what was the... Well, I thought I knew what the point of it was, but I couldn't prove it. And the only way to prove it was to go out and get to people who'd been in the camps, because the Chinese numbers, they don't report on any of this stuff anymore. They've learned to do, that was the first thing they learned not to do. Do not brag about how successful your transplant hospitals are. So, and the only place I knew in the whole world where people had gotten out of the camps was Kazakhstan. And the only reason they got out of the camps is because Kazakhs are being kind of lumped in. There's a lot of ethnic Kazakhs along with the Uyghurs in northwest China. And the Kazakhs speak to what Chinese would say is an incomprehensible language, and they kind of look a lot like Uyghurs and so forth. So they were just pulling them in too. But the Kazakhs have a country. It's a very weak country. It's not very strong. It's been dominated by Russia, but it is a country. And so there was a border, and there were ways of bribing your way across that border, okay? Or your family looking out for your interests, and occasionally the government would put a little pressure. Anyways, some Kazakhs were getting out, probably in the hundreds or very, very low thousands. We didn't really know. And there were people there doing interviews in Kazakhstan, but they were doing the wrong interviews. They weren't asking the right questions. They were just doing interviews about, you must feel so terrible, this kind of interview. And I'm into that stuff too. I'm into the human rights thing in general, but I wanted numbers. And so my book basically establishes what the numbers actually are. This was on it's a complicated process, but I slipped into Kazakhstan and was able to do enough interviews to establish a numerical range of 2.55% of 1 million people go under the knife every year.
It may be worth, I did want to come back to talk to you about that, how you got into Kazakhstan, because it's a fascinating story, but it's it's also staggering. I think you may want to elaborate on it, or encourage you to elaborate it on the economics of the organ harvesting, and the amount of money that frankly the Chinese make from this process. It sort of begins to, unfortunately, it sort of puts in context what exactly is going on and why this has such scale and scope.
It's a dopamine. I mean, it's a dopamine hit kind of thing. I mean, this is not the big money that China should be making in the medical world.
Right.
China should be eating us for lunch and breakfast with pharmaceuticals. I mean, they have a captive population who will take any drug they are ordered to take. Okay, so they can move things through that market very quickly. But I do not know for sure. And anyways, I don't know why they haven't moved into that world. I know that COVID came along and nobody has any trust with the Chinese medical system. And that interferes with, the whole idea of pharmaceuticals is kind of a confidence game, right? You have to believe that the country that's selling them to you has done proper testing and so forth. We've all seen that in the COVID drugs. The point is this. China can do two things at once. In fact, their favorite thing to do is to attack an enemy of the state and at the same time make money while you're doing it. This is the entrepreneurial aspect. Both sides are, both the Chinese Communist Party directive and the Chinese very cultural instinct for entrepreneurial activity, which is often very positive, not negative like this is. but is there, are both satisfied. So the numbers there are look, I'm the only one who's ever come out with numbers on that. And I have to admit, they're back of the envelope, but I've come out with about 9 billion a year. And I think that's probably low. Okay, it's not that much money. It's enough money, though, for a country which originally had nothing but barefoot doctors. Okay, so it's very appealing for people within the medical world. Having said that, there's also studies that show that their suicide rate of transplant doctors is incredibly high, way above the norm. You see, they're always jumping out of windows. The problem is when they jump out of windows, I'm not sure that they're actually jumping out. I think there's probably a strong case that most of those people are pushed. I just don't know. But there's something clearly wrong within that part of the medical system. And it is also true that we have a bunch of doctors in the medical scene, and this is something that my chapter 2 goes into heavily, which I call postmortem, that these guys who are transplant experts and are incredibly prolific, I mean, they're just performing surgeries all the time, have these elaborate web pages. They've got Maseratis, and they do calligraphy, and they do all this stuff, and they're considered really, really like superstars because they make so much money. So there is that aspect. There is a greed aspect here. And then there's a final aspect which people don't talk about that much, which is this is the case with the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, these people are constantly, everything they do is usually to cover up for something else that they've done. Okay. This is a rolling bones, okay? Skeletons in the closet. They're kind of constantly rummaging around. And if you've done Falun Gong, well, then you're not going to do Falun Gong anymore. You're going to do Uyghurs this time and go on to a new subject. And you're going to sort of cover up what you did in a new way. You could say that the whole thing against Falun Gong really started because the Chinese leadership wanted to change the subject from Tiananmen, from the Tiananmen Square massacre. And I know this sounds kind of strange to us, but in a controlled society where you can control the conversation pretty explicitly, this does seem like the solution to a problem for them. Is anytime the public, the Chinese public, who they fear, gets fixated on something, they change the subject. They come up with a new campaign. This is always the way of the world. And it is true in Chinese culture. It's even somewhat true in Falun Gong culture at times, okay? Because a lot of people are from the mainland and they're just used to thinking this way. So I'm saying these are perfectly good people, who try very hard to be virtuous, but on some level they have some of those same attitudes. Yeah, it's hard to describe a little bit, but I did live in China for some years, and you could feel these campaigns moving right you could feel them in the street when they were coming out. A new song would come out. It was just like Orwell describes about the hate song. During Hate Week, right? And there's a lot of truth to that, and you could feel these campaigns and right on the street level. So I now completely lost my way from whatever.
Well, we started talking about we got into kind of the process question. It was, I think you talked about the $9 billion. But I, to be honest with you, I was looking at it from the other side, which is I was staggered by the potential of essentially killing somebody for their organs. Mm-hmm. The amount of money and obviously the perverse incentive that having that kind of system created, which is I gather just simply financing or providing support for what's happening with the Uyghurs.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's a huge part of it. And you've got foreign organ tourists, which I don't go into very heavily in the book. I've always kind of left that area for others, sort of for enterprising journalists. I can always suggest things. Right. But I don't, we are looking into that a little bit now. And I may end up being kind of either a silent partner in that investigation or, if they want me to, being a co-author. But we're looking into something on the Germans right now as being possibly the number one organ tourists. We have not been able to establish it yet, but there's a very interesting source in China which is telling us something about that. So people are always very curious who's going over there. Well, yeah, the Saudis are going there and all the Gulf states. They've got the money and they have the interest, because now that they've switched out of Falun Gong largely, not completely, but some largely out of Falun Gong to Uyghur organs, these are considered halal organs. Okay, these people don't eat pork. Okay, so they're Muslims, so they don't eat pork, and presumably they don't drink and don't smoke. That's not really true about the Uyghurs, but nonetheless, they can preserve that kind of illusion. So we know that the Chinese are advertising for the Gulf states. They're really going after that market. But America's in there too. I mean, Americans do slip in from time to time, and certainly Canadians do, and the Israelis used to until they banned it. And the Taiwanese, of course, and Japanese are huge.
I think Canadians coming there speaks of the Canadian healthcare system.
Well,
about their healthcare system.
I know I have a special sympathy for the Canadians on this point. I do kind of, they have this feeling of like, yeah, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. If you need an organ, you really got to go over there yourself. Yeah.
But Ethan, here's a question: what motivated you to do this? I mean, you live in the safe and comforts of Vermont. You decide to risk life and limb to do this research. What's the motivation? I mean, it's great. It's like most people would not do what you do. Would risk life and limb to sneak into China, get all this research, sneak out of China, sneak back in, and so on.
Did you ever read Flashman, the Flashman series? It was sort of a spin-off of Tom Brown's School Days, right? And Flashman is an actual character who gets into all these adventures, all right? Mm-hmm. But he's a bully and a coward, right? That's a little bit how I felt. And I actually reflect that a little bit in the book, because there's an entire chapter where I'm sort of sitting on the fence saying, I don't want to do this. Okay. I mean, it's really, where I'm just sort of going, I don't want to have to go anywhere. I don't want to do this at all. But clearly nobody else was going to do it. And, and I did have the skills with the Uyghurs to some extent, so I knew something about where I was going with this, and I had some background. And most people didn't. Most people were either Falun Gong or they just did Uyghur issues, not both. I did both, and so I mean, it's a really sort of sad tale in a way. But I also realized we weren't going to get anywhere without evidence. That evidence was the only thing that was keeping us. Everybody was against us, and the New York Times had a great reporter, but then they fired her because she was talking about organ harvesting. She's writing very good articles. One of the best China reporters they ever had, Dee Kirsten Tatlow. They canned her ass. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Pardon my French. But
YouTube.
The thing is, we had doctors, but most of the doctors were really into the idea of engagement in China and just thought, the things hadn't been clearly explained. Best practices and all that stuff. You had some great politicians like Congressman Chris Smith and Dana Rohrabacher. Well, he was still there in the House, but how much could they really do? And as you know, I mean, during the Clinton years and really on, when Hillary Clinton was sex state, I mean, they weren't going to do anything in China. They were constantly covering up for China.
They're doing better targeting equipment.
You're touching on kind of one of the challenges is you've written about the subject over a decade ago. Yeah. Different, obviously, it's new information. But I mean, one of the things we're discussing is that it's hard to be a China expert and not have access to China. But then that operates as a kind of form of censorship where people know that if they're too explicit or they run afoul of the Chinese leadership, they won't have any more access.
Mark, I don't actually. I'm going to have to contradict you on that one.
Okay.
Even if I could have gone to China, I wouldn't have gone to China for this story, because anybody who talked to me, you're poisoned. You're just. It's like It's like you've got a terrible sickness and you're going to destroy.
Right.
So you'd be condemning people to death. And that's something I'm really not comfortable doing. I'm comfortable, yes, everybody's got to take some chances and make some sacrifices, and I take them along with everybody else.
Right.
Okay? That's my goal. It's like, okay, share the risk. But I honestly, when it's going to be something like you're just going to get the person killed, I'll give you an example of that.
Sure.
So Falun Gong, years ago, this is years and years ago, when the organ harvesting story was first breaking out, I got a call from, remember that woman who broke up the press conference, Bush's press conference, holding up a Jiang Zemin murderer, with the screaming. She's a very nice woman, actually, Wang Wenyi. And she called me up and said, Ethan, we're talking to a doctor in China tonight, and we'll have somebody there who can translate for you too, so you can be in on the call. And I said, they're in the mainland. How are you going to make this call secure? We have our ways. We have special methods. I said, okay. We got on the phone. This guy had very interesting information. He was from Sun Yat-sen Hospital. I can reveal that now. We all said good night, and then that guy disappeared. He had a wife and family. He's gone. Never heard from again. Okay? And I said, I didn't really feel guilty about that. I didn't arrange the call, but I was part of it. I was almost like an accessory. I just felt this is just not the way to go. There's got to be other methods, and that's why Kazakhstan.
Right.
There, you might get people in trouble. They might get questioned, okay? Even their family members might get a little harassment, but most likely they're not going to just send them back to China, or they're certainly not going to just arrest them and throw them to the wolves, okay? It's an authoritarian state. It's a police state, but they kind of don't want trouble, and they don't want people in the human rights community or in the Trump administration, complaining about stuff either. So there's a tendency to hang back a little bit. So I said, Kazakhstan's the only place. It's going to be the place where I have to go. And I was very reluctant to do it because I knew that it would be very hard if I didn't get in. I had to get in without being recognized. If you got recognized at the border, if you just flew into Almaty, the major city, they're going to put a tail on you, and they're going to document everything you do, and anybody you talk to is going to get in this kind of trouble. Maybe it's not a death sentence, not like China, but it's going to be bad. And I really hate the idea of witnesses getting tortured because of something that, because I wanted the answer to a few questions. Now, look, there are other people out there who have a different theory. They're like, if we could just get everybody to talk, you see, there'll be too many people for them to round up. And I think that's a fine theory. That's a young man's theory. That's an internet theory. No offense to Blake, Dwight. No offense. Well, Dwight, not really, but Blake. Okay. You can, if we just do that, it's almost like it reminds me of hippies in the 60s, so as long as we're totally open about our feelings and, then everything will be fine. Okay. It's like, no, that doesn't actually work when it comes to China.
Remember, their philosophy is power flows from the barrel of a gun. That's where the PRC's philosophy is. Power flows from the barrel of a gun. You could be lovey-dovey all day long. Yeah, but power is still flowing from that gun.
Now imagine millions of guns, Dwight, and then you got your picture. Okay, exactly. So I mean, that's the point. I mean, really, you could keep setting them up. They'll keep knocking them down. I mean, that's no problem. All right, just keep bowling a strike. They'll be, okay, here's some more new pins. Okay, let's keep going. I mean, so that was not an option, and the only option was to get into Kazakhstan with unrecognized, just as sort of a tourist, and that turned out to be a more difficult undertaking. Maybe we made it more difficult than it had to be. I don't know.
So you didn't fly in; you drove in.
We drove from Germany.
I find that fascinating. So elaborate on the thinking behind that.
Well, because I reasoned that, and some of this stuff I came up with before I talked to intelligence, but intelligence, I was talking to an intelligence official on each side of the Atlantic, and I was like, look, I've got to come in by car because they don't expect you to come in by car. And you're coming in the wrong side of Kazakhstan. Now, Kazakhstan is as wide as America is, okay? From California to New York, sea to shining sea. That's how long it is. In fact, the Russians used to love to test EMP on Kazakhstan because it was a simulacrum for America, okay? And they'd knock out all the electrical systems. So that's a whole nother story. The point is this. So you come in on the wrong side, that is out by the Caspian Sea. You come across the Caspian Sea by ferry, and then you come into the country. That was part of it. The other part of it was that if you got the right car, and it was below 2005, was older than 2005, you can't really trace the car. It doesn't have a computer chip that you can trace. Any other car you can. Really, any other car. I mean, obviously they can stick something in your car and trace you, like the Breaking Bad or something. Okay, but that's really a little, that requires a little extra effort, right? This means that you can disappear. And the whole point was, once we get to Kazakhstan, we have to completely disappear off the map. There can be no electronic signals coming from our car or anywhere else. That means there's no Google Maps, so I bought a couple of compasses, and I bought a very nice German map that they'd made of Kazakhstan, road map. It was a couple of years old. This kind of thing. And we did elaborate things. I got my daughter to go along with me, my foster daughter, really, and it was under the suggestion of her real father. And I said, well, this is going to be kind of a little bit dodgy, I don't know how well it's going to work. And he said, oh, it's really good for her character. So I said, okay, and I know her really well, and I'm very comfortable with her. So that worked out okay. And that really worked out okay, because that meant we could have an image. So we'd come driving in a RAV4. It's the cheapest 4x4 out there at that time, 2003. The 2003 RAV4 it's like it's just a box. But we had skis. This is all a donation. We had skis on top of the car, and we had funny hats, silly hats that I bought in the Turkish souk, and we had all these notebooks about ecotourism, but particularly about the elusive snow leopard. Okay, so we're looking for the snow leopard. We want to photograph it, right? It's very hard to find. Okay, so we had entire books and drawings and maps of their habitat and all this stuff. We went to pretty elaborate procedures. We had watercolors, so all kinds of things. And we set it up so that we could get through every border with this as the premise, is that we were on a skiing vacation, that my daughter had just graduated from college, and she graduated with honors, and I was taking her on the trip of a lifetime. Okay. And, if you play into something like that, first of all, you get better with each border crossing. And we had a lot of them. Okay. Everything one of them, Caucasus, we had Ukraine, we even got into Transnistria for a little while with Russian border region.
So with the car, you started in Germany, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a long haul. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to emphasize that. Yeah, this is a long trek over.
Yes, it is. And then once you get to Kazakhstan, the roads are terrible. And it was winter. I specifically said we're going to do this in the winter because of the skiing thing, would give us an advantage. The other thing is that this was, I figured we'd be coming in during Christmas time. And even in Kazakhstan, which is largely Muslim, they kind of celebrate Christmas. Everybody takes a lot of time off, and that means the guards get lax. People drink more, a lot more vodka flowing around. People do a lot more traveling to different places. And these are all advantages. It's breaking up the routine. So for all those reasons, we were able to get into Kazakhstan very successfully. We had a very tense moment at the border, the Kazakh border, but it was resolved, and my daughter did a fantastic job of saying exactly what I hoped she'd say. And snow leopard, she started pulling all that stuff out, and then they started matching our stories, and they were the same. And we got biometrically photographed, so they had our faces under file. We also had things to break that up. I'd gone to a expert on photo recognition who makes glasses. I wish I had a pair of them right here, but he makes something called reflecticals. They basically stopped the facial recognition cold, and they look absolutely normal. They just look like dark glasses or even regular glasses. A little bit thick, but so we use those as well. Those can be a problem because it's also, if somebody's observing you, they'll sort of notice, why can't I see this person? Why can't I ID them? What's wrong with their eyes? But the whole thing of facial recognition is done here. It's done through this portion of your face. Okay. So, anyways, that was we had a bunch of things like that. it was complicated. The prep work was complicated, and then getting there was complicated. And then once we got into Kazakhstan proper, it turns into desert, complete desert. And there was a period for where I had to drive for about 12 to 14 hours straight. And we had a tank of, we had a jerry can full of gas, just like the old days. We're sort of filling it up that way. Man, but when I saw that first gas station, we were getting near to the RLC. That was like, such a relief. I can't tell you. My daughter had very bad PTSD the next day. So there's always problems with this stuff and unexpected problems. Then we started getting stopped by the cops all the time because Kazakh cops are like that, and they always want money. And I gave more money away to them than I would have liked to. But the other option was that they take me down to the station, they fingerprint me, they put me in the files, and then the whole investigation is suspect. We couldn't do that. We had to arrive. I'd arranged for 2 fixers on the other end in Almaty, and I knew they'd be a little competitive, but I knew that was probably a good thing. Okay, and they're both great guys. And one is a Christian, the other is a Muslim, and they both had sort of access to different people. And they had arranged for us to have a safe house, an apartment, a flat, in a very interesting part of Almaty, very anonymous, and that's where we did most of our interviews. It was just there.
So having the fixers was how you began to set up the interviews, which you had made
Absolutely.
some contact. Yeah, okay.
But there's one more thing about that that's kind of interesting, and I just put in a plug for this guy. Sarek Jean of a group called Atajur, which just means our yurt. And he was a fantastic help in this process. It was a group of local group, which I don't know if you can see this picture of it here. There we go. So there I am with Sarek Jean. He's the slightly taller guy, and then there's Bekzat, his right-hand man. Bekzat, he is now in jail, not because of me, but and Sarek Jean is in exile, not because of me, but nonetheless, this is terribly painful. I get I talk to Sarek Jean quite often, and I saw him in Washington recently, and these people are heroes. I mean, they really did. They were doing amazing work. They were looking after, and they were embarrassing the Kazakh government because they were saying, "You won't even look after your own sons and daughters, and they're being thrown into concentration camps. What kind of government are you? You're useless, right?" And so Sarek Jean actually has a lot of political potential in Kazakhstan because the people loved this. The people loved his YouTube videos. Okay. But he also had a lot of access. And so he was able to get people to me that I ordinarily would not have been able to get to. All people who'd been in the camps. And I didn't care whether they were going to agree with my thesis or not. I wasn't even going to tell them that. But I just went through a whole bunch of questions, and they would almost never know what I was even trying to get. In many cases, I was just going after disappearances. Anyways, that's a whole story in and of itself. It's how we sort of got to some of the conclusions. But it was a fascinating thing to get into a country, and then at a certain point, COVID creeped up. I started hearing these reports. One of my fixers came by and said, "Look, I'm sick of you getting lost in Almaty. Here is a phone, okay? Believe me, it cannot be traced to you. I've had it bought through it's gone through 3 different parties. Okay, just use it to get your directions." So I used it to look at the news a little bit. And I was like, "What's this funny thing? There's some kind of coronavirus around, And then we started realizing, oh my God, we're going to get caught here. They're going to start closing borders. They'll stop just taking temperatures and so forth. They're going to close borders. And if that happens, all of our information, which we had not sent out, and we could not get it out by internet, that was way too dangerous at that point. We had all these, a lot of this stuff was on micro cassette tapes and stuff like that, but still somebody could go through it. And I said, okay, we've been here for 2 months and we're getting on the road now. And we went through Russia because it was faster. And that was a rather stupid choice because we almost got caught there, but very close. But it's a very funny story in the book, kind of black comedy. Them arguing about whether or not to let us into Russia. So this was back in the day when I have a British passport as well as an American passport. And this is back in the day when the British passport was just fine. Not so much today. But the point was that we were able to get through. We got back, and then as you might expect, the PTSD hit us pretty hard. I started fracturing teeth. I was grinding at night. And I don't think my daughter did so well either. So, yeah.
So how long did it take you? You were there 2 months. How long did it take you to get in and get out? So this is
About
a
a month,
long.
about a month each time. A little less than a
Yeah.
month on the way back because Russia's a lot faster. They plow the roads of snow,
Right.
and they even have prisoners, dumping the snow off the bridges. It's great. It's very efficient. But
Yeah.
no. So we did that, but the point was, I mean, there's a lot more to it than that because then the next year it was Tajikistan. Then the next year I sort of was signing up. I suddenly understood. I've never been a military guy, briefly merchant marine, but I never understood why soldiers would do that. Why they were always sort of signing up for the next tour of duty as soon as they got home. And this time I understood it because you feel very odd when you get home and everything's normal. And my wife's just like, "When are you going to shave off that scruffy beard? Looks disgusting." And you're sort of like, "Where do I sign up for the next thing? Let me out of here."
Right.
And which I did. And so there were 3 things in a row. And we kind of do a big Turkish thing after that and so forth. And they're all interesting in their own way. But the first one is the killer because it's what it establishes the main evidence of the book. And there was one other thing I'd like to mention. The most important evidence is from doctors or somebody who's worked within the medical system because they're the most plausible. They're not a victim. Maybe they don't have as much of an axe to grind, or maybe they just have seen things. In this case, we hit a jackpot. There was a young woman who came in to our apartment, and we had one of the fixers go out and pick her up in a shopping mall. That's where and then he'd put the phone in the Faraday cage, so it can't transmit anything. She came in, she sat down, she was very nice. We had tea ready, and she sat down and introduced herself and then just burst into tears and would not stop crying. I mean, I was like, and this is not something I try to elicit. You must understand. I am not like a TV reporter. Please emote for me. I don't do that at all. Not very different, Dwight. Yes, a little different than the days we used to hang out together.
This days from the NET days, right?
Yeah, a little different from the NET days. This is different. I mean, I find that an interruption. I don't want to do that stuff. But in this case, I could not stop her crying. I'm sitting here with a tissue box, just kind of. And she stops, and then she starts telling me a story about a clinic that's deep underground, underneath a concentration camp. It's 4 stories down in the ground. And the guards there, and they've got the guns at the low ready, and they're totally masked and all this stuff. And this is what goes on down there. And then I start realizing she's not doing hearsay. She was doing this, and she was taking out the intestines. She was the first line of defense. Now, why would you even bother with the intestines? You can't trade. You're not going to use them for anything, right? They're cleaning the intestines, or they were taking them out. Well, they were doing it because she mentioned really briefly something about a stinky imam. And I kind of didn't pick it up with that. Why is she talking about that? And then I realized, it took me about 15 minutes of the interview, I realized, wait a minute. You're saying that there was a stinky imam. There was somebody who stunk up the whole clinic. You have 4 clinics all taking out organs, but it stunk up the whole place so bad that you had to close it down or something. And she said, yes, that's right. We had to close it down because the ventilation system's not up to the task. That's why I was there. Just to take out these. So she had the lousiest work, right? And she's with a Uyghur veterinarian. So they were like the lowest of the low on this process. And, then she went into her gang rape, and, it's an amazing story of that, and, so forth. But basically, the veterinarian comes to her and says, you know what they're doing here? They're harvesting these organs. They're going to harvest you. They're going to harvest me. It's just a question of time. But you're Kazakh. Go to Kazakhstan. Get away tonight. And she stayed up that night. She couldn't sleep. The manager at the clinic had just put his hand down her pants as if he was assessing a piece of ripe fruit or something, and said, come here at 7 tomorrow. I want you here at 7 tomorrow. I have something special for you. And the whole thing was just adding up, and she just made a run for the border. And she lost everything. She lost it. She had an apartment. She had a boyfriend, I think, above her vet, obviously. And she had money. And she came in with $70 into her pocket in Kazakhstan. But she was safe. And she'd never told the story before. And after she told the story, I could tell she was deeply embarrassed, and she just wanted to leave. Just like, I told you my story now. Can I please go now? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it was very emotional. And one of those things. And it's one of those things where it's just impossible for me to refute what she was telling me. It's something you couldn't make up.
Yeah.
I've never even seen in fiction. Because people don't think about things like that, like intestines in these scenarios. But it makes sense. So that's the kind of story that I came back with. So I think this is very valuable. And this is the kind of story that, I had the State Department kind of talking to me saying, why can't you do these stories, on Zoom? Like, you see
So
the kind of stories, this is one of them.
So Ethan, since the book is out, you've been out and about, you've had a number of appearances. What's the reaction been?
Well, I've had to compete with, sort of compete. I mean, he's a friend of mine. Jan Jekelec came out with his book. I beat his book by 3 days, it turns out, but that was just the odds of it. He came out with this book. This is a very good introduction to the whole subject, actually. But it doesn't have a lot. This is the evidence book. I mean, this is the big evidence book. And so basically, this has had a slower uptick, but it'll keep rising for a long time because there's a lot in here. There's so much in here, and there was a lot of care taken to do that. And I even was, there's very good stories which I haven't even come out with at this point. Look, the point is it got a really good review by Phil Hall, who's a screenwriter, right in the beginning. But people don't write book reviews the way they used to, and New York Times doesn't even publish them now. So the world has changed that way. On the other hand, what is different is you can do long podcasts like this one, or like New Tang Dynasty. I've done a series of ones, including a wonderful one with Jan on American thought leaders. So I was on that show. That was we had a great time and a very interesting time. I think it's the most interesting thing probably has nothing to do with that. The most interesting thing is there's suddenly been movement in Congress. Okay, so the Senate, which has always ignored this issue, the House has voted in a stop organ harvesting bill several times, several years in a row, through Congressman Chris Smith. Now, suddenly, it got picked up, or a similar bill got picked up by the Senate, and it's come out of the Foreign Affairs Committee. It's been marked up, and it's come out of it, a unanimous vote. So I expect the Senate will vote on that. If that happens, those two bills are going to go for a reconciliation, and then something will finally come out of this. And that won't be that much. It basically will be enough to block all transplant surgeons in China from coming into the United States. And you say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, it's a huge status symbol to come into the United States. In fact, if you're a Chinese doctor, a Chinese surgeon, and you haven't gone to the States, you're considered kind of, kind of second rate. So I think, it could change history here. We're looking at the cusp of something. And I do think that has something to do with the two books coming out at the same time. And Senator Brownback also came out with a book as well, Senator Sam Brownback, or the former ambassador for religious freedom. So I think altogether, we hit at the right time. It was kind of a lucky strike because people are getting sick of talking about the Middle East all the time. Finally. Okay. And I hate to say it. I mean, human nature is so flighty, but it's true. This is true. It's like people just get sick of stuff and they want to move back to something, or they want to move to another issue. We came out at a good time for them. And so so far we're looking at strong movement in DC, and we're also looking at potentially some movement in Europe. So
well,
we shall see.
So Ethan, when is your next book event? Like, where are you? Are you going to be at Barnes and Nobles anywhere doing these book signings or anything like that? Or
I was just relishing the fact that I might have a little bit of a summer here and like might paint the house and chop some wood and stuff. But you keep dragging me back in. No, I don't know. No, I don't actually have anything scheduled right at the moment. Looks like there's going to be maybe talking to the German Parliament in October and stuff like that. I'm sure some other stuff will come up. I'm not doing a lot of big book events like that, but I'm happy to do them. I did do some reading with the Win Hudson Institute through an event. I actually read a lot from the book, and people liked that. So kind of unexpectedly. This is not a normal book. I mean, it's not a dry book. It's the first chapter is like a mini novel. It's like a narrative nonfiction. It's very upsetting, actually horrifying. And that's another interesting thing, is that the woman who that's about is called Don't Cry Rukia, which was her youngest brother's last words to her while he was about to be cut down by a firing squad. And he knew she was there, that she was being forced to watch. And he said, "Don't cry, Rukia." Now, she's an amazing woman. You can just see her in the middle there. And she, I just saw her in Berlin at the Uyghur conference. And I said, "Rukia, you can either shake my hand or slap my face. It's up to you." And she reached up and touched my face with her finger. And gave me a smile. But it was a very tough thing to write because she's very honest. It's very, very graphic. What happens to her is terrible, beyond terror. And I'm able to prove that it's true because of some of the details. Now, but it looks like she may write her own book now, and I'm really looking forward to helping her with that. Part of what we do here, I hate to say this, I don't mean to sound like I'm such a softie, but I do feel sometimes that we have to get involved in some way with some of our witnesses. You get involved with these people, you become a little bit responsible for them, and that was true. We did get a family out of Kyrgyzstan through Connor Healy of IPVM. Went in my stead because they knew me too well at Kyrgyzstan at that point. And he was able to get the family out of the country 2 days before the Chinese were going to take them back to China. And that family, and then I had to nursemaid them in Turkey for 100 days, which was very similar to, if you've ever seen, what's it called, Argos?
Yeah.
Yeah, that movie Argos.
Yeah.
It's very similar to Argos. They were all sort of, what do you know? Why is it? How is this going to work? We're never going to go. We're going to get caught here. You don't know what you're doing. I think, I said, well, you're right. I don't actually know what I'm doing that well. But, if the Department of Homeland Security, and eventually that's exactly what happened is, they were getting stuck. The Department of Homeland Security wasn't doing anything to move their case along. And I had a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, very, very tough woman, elbows of steel. I mean, the meanest reporter in some ways that I've ever met, but effective. And she said, "How's it going over there in Turkey?" I said, "It's not going. I don't know if I'm just going to have to let these people just like go into Turkish society and hope for the best. I mean, the Chinese are looking for them. This is really bad." And she said, "Let me call up Department of Homeland Security." And she did. And she called them up and said, "What's happening with that case, with the family?" And they said, "Oh, it's the top of the pile." She said, "Really? Because the story I'm writing right now is that you're hanging them out to dry, that they're twisting in the wind. And that's the story." Click. And 2 days later, Department of Homeland Security, there we go. On a path to citizenship, brought the whole family over. Okay.
Well,
that's the way it works. That's Washington, right? So
Ethan, it is hard to find a note that's that positive because much of this is so is candidly it's just it gets grimmer and grimmer. I mean, it's really a credit to you that you've been able to persevere for so many years in developing this, basically bringing the facts out and bringing people to the public.
Let's face it. Yeah, but thank you very much, Mark. But it's also, I mean, if you don't mind, I do mention in the credits here, very long acknowledgments. And for the first time I sort of reveal, it's the Skate Foundation that's really, really, I mean, you can't do this without some money, okay? And I am a cheapskate. I love to go do things cheaply and so forth, but you need to have that backing. And I had it. And, the Skate Foundation, people have all kinds of myths about them and so forth. You know what? They never looked over my shoulder, okay? Ever. They never said, oh, well, we want you to say this, or, we want this political effect. None of that. This was the most, if there's a supporter, this is the way field research is supposed to work, okay? That you let that person go, you give them independence, they make the right decisions, or they don't, whatever, but they have to, and were just firm supporters all the way through. And, and so also Victims of Communism Foundation was very helpful too. So
yeah, our friend Stella, I don't know if you know her, what was Stella's last name? Morabilis or
Morabito.
Yeah.
She writes under. Well, Ethan, we've really gotten to the final moments of this. We really appreciate that. I think, Dwight, if you can put a link up to Amazon one more time, and we really thank you and wish you the best of luck on getting the word out by selling the book.
Yeah, I want to add one thing. If you're really some people, I know because I'm one of them, just hate to spend money, okay, on the web. I know, I'm this way too, okay? I must have been Scottish in my past life, so whatever. But the point is, I haven't checked recently, but if you go to the Xinjiang procedure page on Amazon, I think it lets you get the Audible copy, which is my voice, as irritating as that could be, for like 10 hours reading this thing. And I think you can get it for free, but you just got to remember to cancel the subscription. You joined the Audible Book of the Month Club, and then you got to cancel it. Now, if you were in Mamdani's New York, apparently he's going to take care of that for you because you can't.
Forgive me, Ethan. That's a whole different show.
And Ethan, we look forward to having you down here in Maryland to do a book party.
Well, let's definitely do it, man. Actually, that's a good idea. That's the next place I'm going to go. Maryland. Why didn't I say that? Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, Ethan. Take care. Good night, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah.
Let's go down to Missoni's, where Italian cuisine shines. Let's go down to Missoni's, we'll have a good old time. Homemade